Well, good evening. I see we have a very long here. I mean, crowd here tonight. I'm not surprised. Yeah, I'm going to try not to get the feedback here, but I'm glad we have a nice audience. It's good. This is a significant presentation, and if you read my write-up in the website, you will have a sense of why I think so. I'm going to couch it this way. Based on, I think, a reasonable analysis of the events of the last 57 years and what we know relatively well and what we are close to knowing well, there is no way that the phenomenon as it has been reported, as it has been experienced, has happened without thousands of government people intersecting the issue. There are thousands and thousands of members of the United States government and military who know this issue. They've actually directly intersected it, and they have chosen not to speak about it. We already know many have taken it to the grave. There had to be trash retrieval teams. There had to be research teams. There had to be teams to go out in the field to deal with cleanup problems and special public relations problems. And you had a system in all the basic bases where they had to bring material. These people saw things. They saw them all the time. And they have kept their stuff quiet because, by and large, fortunately, our military and our government is made up of predominantly patriotic people. And their choices, particularly those choices made in the 50s and 60s and 70s, were easily justifiable on national security grounds. Now, some are starting to come forward, some in their 70s and 80s, and that's fine. And there's a witness pool building up. Some call it 400, some say 200. It's substantive, but it could easily be 10,000. So, eventually, there are going to be people, a number of people, coming out with extraordinary stories about their encounters while in the service of the government. And we have to deal with that. It is not easy, right? And we have to be very careful because we know that what's going on is pretty extraordinary, and it's almost more extraordinary than we could know, right? So if they come forward with extraordinary tales and we decide, well, that's just a little too much for me, so I'm just going to beat up on you, right? You're just going a little too far. I have certain standards here. Well, that's going to send a message to thousands of people in the government. Well, I'm going to come forward and talk to people with interest in this subject. You treat me poorly. On the other hand, you just simply can't just let everything go. There's a very complex equation here. So my view is that when people have an extraordinary story and they've been talked to and they've been examined a little bit and investigated and there seems to be some coherence there, they need to be able to tell the tale. They need to be able to come forward and present what they have seen. They need to get a proper hearing. It needs to be examined. And always treated with respect and courtesy. This is essential if we are going to get a lot of very patriotic Americans to continue this process and emerge with this information. Right? Charles Hall is one of the most interesting of these individuals, and his tale is clearly extraordinary. And I'm pleased to have him come and tell it to you, and I hope that you will enjoy it and consider with care. Charles?
Oh. Thank you, Steve. I want to thank Steve Bassett and the members of Paradigm Research Group for inviting me to speak. I enjoy speaking, and it was a pleasure for me to be here today. I hope you can all hear me. You know, I'm a little new with these microphones. As Steve said, I'm Charles James Hall, and I wrote the 3-book series, Millennial Hospitality. And what I intend to do in this talk is, first I will give a short presentation that I would like to keep within 30 minutes, and then I would like to open it up to questions and answers from the crowd. and then stay within my 50-minute allotted time. I note that at 6, the pilots panel will begin speaking, or a few minutes after in the next room, and I'd like to, stay within my time slot. I have previously appeared on a number of radio talk shows and TV shows. I won't read them all to you, but you can see them listed on the screen. George Norrie, Sweeps Fox, and so on. Kevin Smith and Scott Coburn. Some others you see. The list is including Out There TV and Wake Up America and so on. There's more shows than I've appeared on more shows than I'm able to put on these slides. And so this is not an all-inclusive list. I'll start with my biography. I have a master's degree in applied nuclear physics from San Diego State University. I also have a Bachelor of Science degree in physics, in thermal physics, from San Diego State University. And if I'd done a little more research in laser optics, it would have been in laser optics, or if I'd done my research paper in laser optics. In addition, I have a master's in business administration from Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I'm a computer and I'm a database expert, and I have a clearance, and I've worked on classified projects for the government for many, many years. There's a copy of my diploma from California State University at San Diego. Remember, San Diego has several different universities, and this was California State University at San Diego, not to be confused with the other fine universities in the San Diego area. SDSU, the home of the Aztecs, is a very fine place with a fine football team. When I was in the service, I was an enlisted man. I got my degrees after I left the service in 1968, and for which I have my wife to thank for helping me get through college. In July of 1964, I enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. My wife and I both grew up in Wisconsin. I graduated from high school in the class of '62. I attended the University of Wisconsin for a year and a half before going into the service. Some of those events are described in Millennial Hospitality 3, The Road Home. And while I was a weather observer, I was stationed, I did my basic training at Lackland Air Force Base outside San Antonio, Texas. I got trained in the U.S. Air Force Weather Training School, which was at Chanute Air Force Base, Illinois. And then in March of 1965, after graduating from Weather Training School, I was assigned to Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, which is just outside Las Vegas, Nevada. And while I arrived at Nellis in March of 1965, and I stayed there until May 7th, 1967. During that time frame, I spent more than 2 years out on the gunnery ranges at Indian Springs. They're the Nellis gunnery ranges, and they're served by the Indian Springs Auxiliary Field, which is under the command of the Nellis Base Commander. And during that 2.5 years, or 2+ years, I discovered that there is a base out in Area 54 and Area 53 on the north end of Indian Springs Valley, which the U.S. Air Force maintains for the aliens to use. It is literally an alien base. And I'll come back and talk about that more in subsequent slides. In May of 1967, I was sent to Vietnam, and I served in the Mekong Delta with the South Vietnamese from May of '67 until May of '68, as I describe in Book 3, The Road Home. And when I returned from Vietnam, I'd been given many awards. One award was for surviving 37 communist attacks, and while I was in Vietnam. When I returned to America, I had less than 3 months remaining on my term of enlistment. I did not want to re-enlist. I'm not that military. So in accordance with Air Force policy, I was given an honorable discharge on May 8th, 1968, and sent home. Here's an example of one of the many awards I received. It's just the Commendation Medal, but I worked hard to get it. And it shows that I was in the Air Force and that I received a number of awards. The first question I'd like to answer is, where is Indian Springs, Nevada? This is a map, a topographical map that I was provided by Jerry Zeitlin from his website, openseti.org. Now, I put on those extra blue things, the extra markings. Jerry provided me with the map, and you can see it on his website. Down at the bottom, you'll see is the town of Indian Springs. Notice that the base is north of the highway, but everything south of the highway is not on base. It's just ordinary public land. When you're actually, notice that when you're actually standing in the town of Indian Springs and looking straight north up the valley, those mountains that I have circled in blue, which are perhaps 40 miles up there, they are, when you look straight north and just a little bit to the east, that's Area 54. And when you look straight north and just a little bit to the west, that's Area 53. The main alien hangar is in those mountains in Area 54, just below the tree line. And the alien housing area is underground in Area 53. You enter them through tunnels. That whole area is inside the Area 51 perimeter. Dreamland is that area, Area 54, Area 53, the mountains on the right, and some of the mountains on the left. And I'll get to that more in greater detail. Now, in addition to the area that I've circled in blue, where the main bases are, there are at least 5 or 7 other sub-bases which the aliens only take their scout craft to around the valley. The main base is where the deep spacecraft arrive. Here is a picture taken by Captain David Coote, and I've put on the red markings. The red writing is mine, but this is a picture that Captain David Coote provided for me. Was kind enough to provide for me. And you'll notice off on the right is Dogbone Lake, okay? That's inside Dreamland. Dreamland includes the western part of the desert Southwest game ranges, where the cover story is that if you're out there and you see something white, pretend it's a bighorn sheep. The aliens, as we'll see in a few slides later, have very large eyes, and when you see them looking at you above the sagebrush, it's easy to mistake them for bighorn sheep, especially if you're terrified, and I speak from direct experience. The red area, where the alien hangar entrance that I've shown in red, in that mountain is the alien hangar entrance. It's physically on a ridge that comes out from the mountain. The ridge comes out to the southeast. You'll notice on the left is the old Range 4 Valley. And in my books, Millennial Hospitality, you'll remember that I refer to the legend of Range 4 Harry. Range 4 Harry, as we'll see, was one of the alien guards. And he had a dry sense of humor, like all of them, as we'll see. And he thought of it as kind of a laughable joke. You know, he's the big hairy monster from Range 4, when in fact he's white and has no hair. And later you'll see towards the bottom I've identified the area that used to be Range 1, which I also talk about in my books. Now, on this picture, which we also I'm indebted to Captain David Coote for, I'd like to talk about the tall white deep space landing area. Once again, you'll notice Dogbone Lake on the right. Notice that even on a hazy day, it's easy to pick out. The deep spacecraft, which the tall whites, bring into the base, routinely come down to, when they come into the earth, Dogbone Lake is their landing field. And they don't normally touch down at Dogbone Lake unless they're in some kind of trouble or they need to adjust something. Normally they just come down to the same altitude as the main hangar. Then after they become stationary and everything is settled down, then they head off to the northwest to where the hangar entrance is. Dogbone Lake runs north and south, okay?
There's no water.
Normally there isn't any water in the dry lake beds, although sometimes in the wintertime or the spring, if you have a big rainstorm, there may be water in the dry lake beds, but normally there isn't. Okay? When you go out to Dogbone Lake, as I have, it's not unusual for there to be absolutely nothing to see. Even if the deep spacecraft have touched down at Dogbone Lake, they may not actually sit down on the ground. They may just come to where they're floating just a few feet above the ground and not leave any footprints or anything behind. They may not actually have disembarked. They might just be stabilizing the propulsion system or stabilizing the fields around them. Now, but notice the distance from Dogbone Lake to Old Range 4 and Old Range 3, which we can remember from the topographical map. That was like 40, 50 miles, and we'll touch on that in a later session since I want to make sure I stay within my time limit. Now, people ask me why I never took pictures of the tall whites, and here's a picture of my wife on her wedding day. And, and so I'd like to give a physical description of the tall whites. Now, well, you'll see my wife looks white, and she has on her wedding gown, and even makes me float out over the people. Meeting the tall whites was always a very emotional experience, even when I got used to it. It took me more than 6 months to get over the fear of meeting the tall whites. We're naturally afraid of them, and you see those desert valleys are very desolate. Being out there like 20 miles, being 20 miles out from any other human at 3 in the morning and having anyone step out of the sagebrush would be frightening. When they're not human and they come in groups, my first reaction was one of panic. When I was a weather observer out at the ranges, the entries in my log books went back 7 years. And during that 7-year period, more than 41 weather observers had been sent to the ranges before me. Before I got there, each weather observer in turn would do 6 weeks of temporary duty, and then each weather observer would take his turn going out there. And that had been going on for as long as the ranges were out there. And of course, a weather observer keeps very extensive log books. You keep the daily log, the weather report log, the inventory log, and so on. And when you read through those log books, each one in turn would start by trying to do his duty. But after just a very few days, sometimes only 2 or 3 days, sometimes a week, sometimes 10 days, they would get compromised. Many would become so afraid of the ranges that they wouldn't go out there. They would literally sit in the chow hall at Indian Springs and make up the weather right out of thin air, Just say, well, I suppose if I were to take the winds, they would say this, Some would try valiantly to do their duty, and they would get so terrified that when they went into Nellis to the neurosurgeon in the base hospital, they would get reassigned to places like Germany or England or Hawaii. Some would be given discharges for, because they couldn't take it anymore. A few had gotten attacked and burned, as I describe in my book. When you're out there and the tall whites come, when you lose your self-control, then if you happen to hit one of the children or one of the tall whites, then they respond the way you and I would respond. It's not pleasant, as I describe in my books. The tall whites have bodies and bones that are thinner than humans. Their skin is as white as a piece of paper. They have larger eyes than humans do. Their eyes are roughly twice the size of our eyes. And when they're young, they're blue and white, just like ours. When you look at them, they look just like people with larger eyes. The eyes spread around the side of their head more than a human's does, and they're very prominent. And their eyesight is as good, at least, as that of a cat. And their hearing is as good, as at least, as that of a dog. They're capable of making sounds with their vocal cords that humans can't hear, just the way that I'm told rhinoceroses can do. But they can hear them, and they're well aware of this. When I was out there among them, it wouldn't be uncommon to apparently hear animal sounds out in the sagebrush, sounds like meadowlarks or dogs barking or horses whinnying. Really, it was the aliens. When they would walk in on me, if they felt like just talking between themselves, they were perfectly capable of talking between themselves using sounds too high for me to hear, and they were well aware of that. So they could stand in a line, say, many times, well, just out of hand reach, if I were brave enough to wait for them to come in that close, and it took months for me to get that brave. And it would appear that they weren't talking at all. But in fact, when you watched them, you could see that they were communicating between each other. Okay? Now, they have much less hair than humans do. They don't have any hair on their arms. The hair in their head is only about half the thickness of our hair, and their hair is naturally so thin that it's transparent, so thin and blonde that it's transparent. Sometimes, if you see them out in the sunlight at a distance and they're wearing their hair short, because it grows just like ours does, it'll look as though they don't have any hair. When they do come in close and you see that they do have hair, they'll look naturally platinum blonde. They, throughout most of their life, they're the same height I am, 5'11". They live 10 times longer than humans, and so a normal adult, a normal alien adult, equivalent to a human 21, 22 years old, would be 200, 250 years old. They live about 700 years, give or take, depending on each individual, and they don't age the way humans age. When they get to be equivalent to a human, 39, 40, in there somewhere, they begin growing again. And then they continue growing periodically. They have several other growth phases, and they get taller. So that throughout most of their life, although they're my height, once they start growing again, they can become very tall before they die. It's not unusual to see older tall whites that are 8.5, 9 feet tall. This is not necessarily helpful for them because their bones and skeletons grow, but their internal organs do not grow in proportion. So as they become taller, they become more frail. It was unusual to see a tall white more than 8 feet tall just walking by themselves. By the time they got 8 or 8.5 feet tall, it was the most common thing was to see a younger tall white come and walk beside them to study them because they were becoming more frail and more shaky. By the time they got to be 9 feet tall, it wasn't at all unusual for them to not be, to just be, if they were standing somewhere being posted as a guard, for them to stay there until a younger person came to help them walk away. You see in Book 1, in my chapter entitled Millennial Hospitality, for which Book 1 takes its name, the old lady who was a tall white, she was out hiking in the desert with her younger niece, who would stay beside her all the time to study her. You see, the other man that had been out hiking with them, he was willing to allow the old lady to go take her own separate path, only because she wasn't alone, because she had her niece with her. She was very shaky and frail and a little ditzy too, even for a tall white. And it's kind of like their version of Edith Bunker, as I describe in my book. You know, the ones that are our height, the young adults, can easily dress up to pass as humans. And when I say easily, I mean from my point of view, it seemed easy enough for them to do that. How it appeared from their point of view is seemed easy enough for them too, for most of them. In Las Vegas, Nevada, especially in the 60s, you know, on Saturday night, along about 11 o'clock, everybody looks a little weird. Half of them look drunk, you know. You see a lot of tourists there that you wonder which part of the world they came from. Well, under the circumstances, see, for a tall white lady to dress up and put on, and for the men to put on sunglasses, well, in Las Vegas, there were a lot of men walking around with sunglasses after 11 o'clock at night, and you didn't go up and push them, or you'd find out which casino they were protecting, you know. Well, see, it was very easy for them to walk into a casino at 11 o'clock at night or 12 o'clock at night and dressed as humans and go totally unnoticed. Remember, the tall whites weren't by themselves. They always came as a group with their guards, and they also typically came with a group of human CIA guards. One night I was standing on the corner outside the Four Queens Hotel and Casino in the summer of 1966 when a group of them came through. First there was a group of 6 CIA guards, 4 men and 2 women who came through in the wide perimeter, and the wide perimeter being about a half a block in each direction, and took up positions, you know, just inside the casino looking out the windows. 2 in the Golden Nugget, a man and a woman, 2 across the street in Binion's Club, 1 down the street to the left of me, you know, a couple in the back, and so on. Then the tall whites came through with their guards, and the tall white guards, of course, were dressed like humans. They were male. And then the 2 women, the teacher and Pamela, came in, and what they were doing was what all tourists do, just enjoying themselves. Well, see, the tall whites, when they came into Las Vegas, they knew perfectly well they were coming into a friendly town. When I was down in the Stardust Hotel and Casino on the Strip, the old Stardust used to have a motif where hanging from the ceiling was fake stars and galaxies and supposedly what it would look like if you were out in space between the stars. The tall whites loved to come in and see that. They thought it was really entertaining because they'd been out between the stars. They said, oh, that's what humans think it looks like, you know. Well, the CIA had kind of established that casino in that area as a friendly part of town. So they had, you know, a pit boss and a team of dealers and a couple of lady CIA guards who would function as Keno girls. And at any time at all, the CIA team could come in and replace the regular pit boss and guards and just be dealing at the table, and or handling the crap table, or watching the showboat across the street or a casino and so on, and just making sure that nothing unexpected happened. And then when the tall whites came in, for example, one day when they came in at 4 a.m. on Sunday morning, they were just friends. You know, they were just friendly guys around, so that, you know, if you were to ever try to go up to one of the tall whites, you would discover that the CIA guards would muscle you out, you know, unless they knew, you know, and you could go up there, and of course they knew me in those days, and so, you know, the stories they would tell would be kind of interesting. And although, you know, the CIA guards were never very talkative, you know, they'd always want you to just pretend they were ordinary, you know, and that was kind of hard. The one way I used to pick them out was that because the tall whites are thinner than we are, the one thing they can't disguise is the way they walk. They walk differently than humans. They come from a planet that is much larger than the Earth, has a stronger gravitational field, and when they walk, they naturally, once you get the idea of just standing and looking at a crowd in Las Vegas, as I did, at night, and just watching the crowd silhouetted against some distant lights, you can pick them right out if they're there, because they shuffle when they walk, you know. The gait is just simply different than that of a human, because they don't full stride the way we do and stuff. And I can answer that more in the question and answer session, since I want to make sure I don't go over. Meeting the tall whites was always a very emotional experience, even when I knew they were friendly and that they hadn't come to hurt me, because they're not human. Some of the emotions that I used to feel when they came, the first one is that we as humans are naturally afraid of them. Every man I ever met who had seen them always related to the fact, began by saying, I was afraid. My friend in POL who saw them out at Range 4 described, and they had shut down his truck, described how he was so terrified he was going to try to walk back into town from Range 4 on a hot summer day, knowing it is impossible, that you'd die in the desert heat, and that he'd gone down into the desert for a mile or so and hidden under the sagebrush until they left. And he used to tell me, the first time he told me that, he was shaking in fear. As you see in my books, when I first encountered them, I was terrified. At first I thought I was dreaming when they came into the barracks at night with American generals with them. The early encounters, which there were many episodes that are not in my 3 books that may be in later books, because in my books I was trying to capture the emotion of how it felt and convey that to the reader. Originally, the book started as an autobiography, and I wanted to capture those emotions and convey it to my children and grandchildren. And then, as you see, my wife said, no, we have to publish this. And the initial emotions were, I found that I couldn't describe them with the spoken word, and that's why I wrote the books, as an attempt to capture that. The initial encounters, I was in my barracks in May of 1965, and at night the American generals with 3 and 4 stars would come through with their alien counterparts, the alien generals, because the Tall White Society is structured very similar to ours. And when they came through, you know, I thought I was nuts. I thought I was dreaming, you know. When I was sent to Indian Springs, I was never given a briefing. No one ever came to me and said, this is what you're facing. No one ever came to me and said, you're part of a project, and had me sign a piece of paper. No one ever came to me and said, the aliens would like to tell you something. The aliens never wanted to tell me anything. They were perfectly fine. I was an enlisted man. It was perfectly fine with everybody if I was never told. Everything I knew, I had to figure out for myself, and by reasoning and by observing and so on. As a weather observer, I was never part of a specific project. I was never helping design an airplane. However, you'll see in book 3, in the appendix, since I have a master's degree in physics, I have published Hall photon theory. I believe I understand the physics of how their craft works. And we'll get to that in a later slide. But meeting them was a very emotional experience. They are naturally as afraid of us as we are of them. Some nights after I got used to the idea that they were real and that they would come around with the men, women, and children, because they have men, women, and children just as we do. And once I got used to that, then it was kind of their turn to be afraid. I remember one night, there were many nights, but one night, for example, after the deep space had arrived at sundown on the night of the full moon as usual, and this was about August 1966 in there. And the tall white guards, who were experienced, had brought a group of new arrivals down to show them me, what a human looks like. And I know I'm the test human. I'm an enlisted man. If anything goes wrong, they can just cut me down and we haven't missed anything, you know. And the new arrivals have to get used to talking to a human before they can be introduced to quality folk like generals and scientists, you know. So take them out, and if anything goes wrong, well, we'll just cut down Charlie, you know. But nobody's told me that. But I remember it was almost comical because some of them were so afraid of me that they wouldn't come within a quarter mile. They were out in the desert, you know, like, you know, did you see the gorilla? You know, yeah, I saw the gorilla. I'm just out there trying to do my job, right? You know, they have a very dry sense of humor. When you get to know them, they don't have contact sports like we do because they don't have the bodies for it. If they break an arm, it takes their arm 10 times longer to heal up than it does ours. If they scratch themselves, it takes their scratch 10 times longer to heal up than it does you and I. One day I was out there in the morning and I scratched myself, and I was young, and in the most perfectly ordinary fashion, I put on some alcohol and forgot about it. And the next day when they came, the scratch had already healed up. And one of the new arrivals, who was braver than the other, was talking to the guard, and they noted that my scratch had already healed up and asked if all humans were that way. It seemed to be one of the few things that humans did that they found envious. We also multitask mentally in a way that they don't. if they're doing something, they just concentrate on it. So if they're writing, then they're just really focused in on writing. If they're walking, they're focused in on walking. They're surprisingly easy to surprise when they're doing something because they just naturally focus in so well. One night, I was young, and one night I was taking the 4:30 a.m. weather report. As a weather observer, I had to get up Monday through Friday at 3 o'clock in the morning. I bunked by myself in the barracks at Indian Springs. And I had to go out there for to get ready and release a balloon for 4:30 a.m. and measure the upper level winds. And, and as you see in my books, originally I was, on my first tour duty, it was 6 weeks of TDY. They sent me back to Nellis. The guy who replaced me got compromised. The tall whites would have killed him, but the generals asked them otherwise, as I describe in book 1. So they sent me as the replacement. Then the guy after me got attacked and burned, so they sent me as the replacement. So then they formed a committee with the tall whites and the American generals, and they decided that they would just pick one weather observer and send him all the time. They picked me. And they gave me special orders, which were secret, and sent me out there. I remember well the day my commander, a major, who wasn't a high enough rank to be told anything, I remember the day he gave me the orders. It was a Sunday. They had me working the day shift at Nellis when no one else is in the weather station. And he had to come in at noon, and the Nellis base commander and the number 2 man had to come in at noon and receive the orders from the Pentagon. And then the 2 guards and a dog had to bring the major over, and he locked the doors. The guards stayed outside, and he began reading me my orders. And he said, "Airman Hall, you're cleared to go to Dreamland anytime you want, day or night." And I thought he meant it was okay to sleep on duty. You know, I was so new. You know, what a place, you know. And then when he finished reading the orders, he said, "Nothing you do will ever be classified. No one can come out and inspect you. No one can ever ask you a question. But you can tell anyone anything you want at any time if they're willing to listen to it." Okay? And then I had to sign the paper saying I understood my orders. And as usual, I always say, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Well, will there be a cot out there? You know, because if I'm going to get to sleep on duty, you know, I want a soft place, right?" And the major looked a little confused, and he said it was his understanding that Dreamland was a place, but that only I would know where that place was. And that was the first time I'd ever heard or seen tell of Dreamland. And even that was kind of emotional because, you know, I was thinking, well, gee, you know, what kind of place is this? Then the major had to put, you know, my signature. The paper just said Charlie has received his orders. It was put in the top secret safe in his place, and I had to sign the orders from the Pentagon, and he took it back to the Nellis base commander and the number 2 man, and the next day I shipped out for Indian Springs. And then after that, I was just the observer. Nobody could replace me, you know. And married men couldn't be sent out there at all. Single men could only be sent out in groups of 2 or 3, and only for 3 days and 2 nights, once, period. One of the other men who served with me that I refer to as Small Jimmy Payne in my books, he could be sent to relieve me for 2 weeks every 6 months, but only if the other maintenance people at Indian Springs accompanied him wherever he went, for his own protection. But for me, I could go anywhere I wanted, provided I did so alone. I could go anywhere, up in all those mountains that we saw on the maps, anytime I wanted, day or night, and I've been up in all those mountains. If I took someone else out with me, I wouldn't have been in any trouble. It's just that the guards would have stopped the truck and said, "Well, I see you got somebody with you, Charlie," and shot him. Okay, and said, yeah, I wouldn't have been in any trouble at all, but the people who were with me would have been gunned down. The tall whites, going on with the emotions that accompany meeting them, they enjoy having fun. That's why you would see them in Las Vegas. They got bored as the devil out there in the desert. The women and kids and the young men wanted to come into town and have fun the same way that humans do, because they have emotions just like we do. The only difference is that they handle the emotion of anger differently than we do. And I believe I discussed that in this next slide. When I was a young man, if I met another young man, you know, and we didn't immediately like each other, you might take him aside and say, "You know, there's something about you I just don't like." And then you'd beat each other up, and then you'd be friends, you know. You'd have a good fight, and then pretty soon you'd be bonded. The tall whites aren't like that. If they ever become angry with you, they will either just go away, period, and never come back, or they will attack you. And there will never come a time where you and they are friends because now you've fought it out. You're either dead or they're gone. There's no other way. That's the way they are. The mothers love their children. When the tall white mothers came, it was very common for the mother to begin by saying to me, do you understand that we love our children more than human mothers love their children? Or in other words, don't touch my kid or I'll kill you, right? And of course I always, on the other, if they came and they didn't say anything, then it was very common for me to begin the conversation by saying, I understand that you love your children more than human mothers love their children. Or in other words, I'm not going to touch your kid, please be, don't take it out of me. They're very protective of their children, including the men. They'll do anything to protect their children. When they came around with the little children, you really couldn't touch the child, period. The mother you'd be facing one angry mother if you ever reached out and just touched the child. You really couldn't speak to the child in a negative fashion. You really couldn't say, don't do this. The mother, that's suicide. The mother will kill you. And if she can't do it herself, they never come alone. The guards will come help her. The tall white guards will. They're very proud of their family relationships. It was common, for example, especially the women, when they came, and they always came in groups, to begin by pointing out family relationships, if there were some, to begin by saying, the guard in the tower is my mother's sister, or my mother's son, or this is my brother, and so on. They were very proud of them. Each tall white individual was different from every other tall white individual, just like humans are all different from each other. And they were very proud of the fact that each one was separate and individual. And so when you talked about, say, like when Paula wanted to draw a picture of the tall whites, which appears on her website, and that is a very specific tall white lady and her child on Paula's website. Drawing a picture of the tall whites was kind of like trying to draw a picture of somebody from New York City. They're all different, so you had to pick a specific person on a specific day at a specific time and say that's what they looked like at that time, you see. Their nervous system operates at least 2 to 3 times faster than ours, and this lets them think and react both logically and emotionally faster than a human does. As you see in Book 3, in the chapter entitled The End of Innocence, when I was standing out there north of the Range 3 Lounge, and the tall white lady whose CIA name was Pamela, when she panicked on me, she could pull her weapon, point it at me, and fire it at me so fast that I hardly had time to tighten the muscles in my throat. Because once they became angry, and they could just change emotional states that quickly because their nervous system ran so much faster than ours. They enjoyed outthinking me. One time I asked them, on one night when the teacher came with the children and the guards, because they never came alone, and the kids were playing on the tower and I'd finished my balloon run, I went over to the teacher and I said to her, and she was just a short distance away, closer than here to that box sitting on the table. The teacher was and Range 4 Harry and school bus driver and co-pilot and tour guide, they were some of the few that I felt willing to approach. Usually I preferred to stand silent, to stand with my feet in one place and my arms at my side. They never want to be touched by a human, and let them come in as close to me as they were willing to, and let them leave whenever they wanted. But there were very few. There were only a few that I was willing to actually walk up to, and to where you'd talk. And I remember asking the teacher where they came from, and she said to me, "Do I know the names that they use when they talk about the stars?" And I said, "No, I didn't." And she said, "So if we told you, you still wouldn't know where we came from?" And I said, "No." And then they were all laughing because they'd outthought me. It was apparently pretty easy to outthink Charlie. And they enjoyed doing that. They enjoyed that kind of humor. And They also meticulously keep their agreements. They're like Philadelphia lawyers that way. One of the first agreements that I negotiated with them was that I would never come up behind them and scare them, and I asked them to never come up behind me and scare me. If they came and I was working, I wanted them to make some noise or something, so I knew they were there. And then the agreement was that I would stand in place when they approached me from the front or from a direction that I could see them. And then they could come in as close as they wanted. I wouldn't close the distance. I'd just stand there. And they could come in until they felt comfortable. And if they felt like leaving, I would never pursue. If they wanted to leave, if they felt they'd come in too close or they got nervous or something that they felt it was time for them to go, I would never pursue after them. And vice versa, if they were coming in on me and I got nervous because they were getting too close, as in that episode I described in The Wayward Wind, when the alien doctor was coming in on me and it freaked me out, that if I chose to start backing off, they wouldn't pursue. They would just stop and until we'd both agreed on a mutual distance. And they kept that meticulously, and of course they expected me to keep that meticulously too. And that's how they are. The agreement they had with the U.S. Air Force was that nothing I did would ever be classified, that I could tell anyone anytime I wanted. They expect the American generals to keep that to the letter. It isn't anything special about me. It's that once they've made an agreement, that's the agreement. If there weren't something in it for them, they wouldn't make the agreement. You're never forced to make an agreement with them. But once you make an agreement with them, man, the last thing you ever want to do is to break the agreement. Each one of them is different. Some are humanistic, like the doctor. Their generals are what you expect a general to be. Each one is different. Let's see here. Oh, let's see. I got a mouse here. There we go. Okay. In closing, I'd like to quote a few things. This I'm quoting from Paula Harris in her nice book, Connecting the Dots. This is found on pages 46 and 47. In this page, she is interviewing Monsignor Corrado Balducci, who will be speaking here, I understand, tomorrow. And Paula Harris asked him, can you quote some church fathers who suggest the existence of life on other planets? And Corrado Balducci replied, yes, there are several. And forgive me if I mispronounce the Italian names. Andrea Beldrimi, the Salesian father and servant of God, prayed for the inhabitants of other planets. And as you see, of the 16 books he wrote, one seems to deal with this topic, and the second was the recently sanctified Padre Pio. Monsignor Corrado Balducci continued, quoting Padre Pio, we earthlings are nothing too. The glory of God, the Lord certainly did not limit his glory to this small planet. On other planets, other beings exist who did not sin and fall as we did. Then Paula Harris asked him, is it a grave mistake to think that you are the official voice of the Vatican? And Monsignor Balducci answered, these ideas are mine and I do not represent the Vatican. However, I'm told that the late Holy Father Pope John Paul II has seen me on Italian TV several times and follows my radio homilies. If there was some objection, I'm sure I would know. Based on that statement, I have the following observations. The situation today is kind of the reverse of the one that Galileo faced. Back then, in the time of Galileo, the church wanted everyone to think inside the box, and scientists wanted to think outside the box. Now it's the reverse. Now the church and the philosophical philosophers and so on are willing to think outside the box. It's the scientists who keep wanting us to think inside the box. It's the scientists who want to pretend that we can't travel faster than the speed of light when I routinely saw the deep spacecraft land, having come here to Earth, traveling faster than the speed of light. I never saw anything that would lead me to believe that aliens were supernatural, that they seeded our planet. I never saw anything to believe that would lead me to believe that the tall whites wanted to create hybrids. They were very proud of the way they were. that there were wormholes in space, or that they traveled forward or backwards in time. However, their craft did routinely travel faster than the speed of light in making the deep space crossing. That I observed on many occasions. I've captured this. Now, I'm not going to talk about science today because I want to stay within my 50 minutes, and I see I got to hurry if I'm going to do it. I want to speak, but in book 3, in the appendix, I have Hall photon theory, and I'll just show this slide to show that it's there. The basis of Hall photon theory is that I believe that inside the photon there's a third field, and there's an electric field, a magnetic field, and a third field that I call the starshine field. And I believe that if scientists were to study famous experiments like the Michelson-Morley experiment, the Waterfield telescope experiment, what's happening outside toroidal coils, that it would be very obvious that there was way more to physics than what they're looking at. And I described it in my book. And the tall white spacecraft appeared to be, the design of the tall white spacecraft knew about the existence of these other fields and used them in the design. The tall white spacecraft had an inner hull and an outer hull. And for example, and in between those two hulls were miles of fiber optic windings. Inside the Scout, in the small Scout craft, for example, I one time estimated that there might have been as much as 1,000 miles of fiber optic windings in between there. Melted fiber optics could be easily confused with the slag from an aluminum furnace. And you'll remember that Alan J. Hynek said he had like 500 samples of slag that had fallen off from flying saucers, and they were characterized as slag from an aluminum furnace. Fiber optics is typically 49% aluminum. You'll notice that in the previous presentation they mentioned that fiber optics was ceramic with plastic around it. Well, that plastic melts at what, 150, 160 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll see in book 2, in the chapter entitled "The Day Without View," when I observed the Scout craft, it had a meltdown of its fiber optics. And the aliens alone, without humans around, without the U.S. Air Force or whatever, worked on that Scout craft from like Wednesday afternoon till the following Monday morning, day and night. They played hell getting it to work again. And when they finally got it working on Monday morning, 2 other Scout craft came down and flew beside it to stabilize it while they nursed it back up to the main hangar to do more repairs on it. As far as I know, I'm the only human that got within a short viewing distance. I got within, I don't know, 100, 200 feet of it before their guard wouldn't let me get any closer. And what they were working on was fiber optics. And inside the deep spacecraft, as I describe in book 3 in the opening chapter, The Road Home, it had taken meteor damage, and it had the same construction, an inner hull and an outer hull. And then inside the inner hull, there was a row of, it was like a cruise ship, there was a row of rooms that obviously functioned as storage for supplies, boxes and other things. And then inside that was another row of bulkheads, and then inside that was the living area. And when the meteor had come through, it had obviously struck the craft just over the left running light up on top, and had come down through at more or less a 45-degree angle, and had just blasted its way through that row of rooms that were storage rooms, and had just come in the top and gone out the bottom. And when they finally got that landed at the Mount Charleston ski area in that snowstorm, as I describe in my books, man, that was just barely holding together. They had to land. I've always felt that if the Tall Whites had had any other base area on the Earth other than Indian Springs, because of the storm that we were having at the time, that they would have put in somewhere else if they could have. But you know, they had to land. They couldn't have stayed out in space. They told me even another 2 days, you know, waiting for the storm to clear. And so that technology must be easily accessible for American scientists if they would start thinking about famous experiments like Michelson-Morley with an open mind. The Michelson-Morley experiment, once you realize the photon has a third field, there's no reason whatever to believe in relativity and to believe that the arms of the interferometer are shortening or anything. Now, I want to close up because I want to stay, as close as I can to my time allotment, and I see I'm getting very close. I have just a few minutes for questions and answers, and then I'll close. You've been a wonderful audience, and as I describe in my book, in Book 3, I have personally seen two kinds, the tall whites at Indian Springs, and the ones I call the Norwegians with 24 teeth in Madison, Wisconsin. The Norwegians with 24 teeth look so much like us that if my dentist hadn't pointed him out to me, I would have never guessed it. Now, humans are genetically coded for 32 teeth, as are all mammals. Some dinosaurs had 32 teeth. No mammal has ever had genetic coding for 24 teeth. However, in a 1949 U.S. Army study, something over 5,562 people were put to death in the German death camps in World War II that were rounded up from Norway, Denmark, Germany, and Poland, who were genetically coded for 24 teeth and had slightly webbed feet. And the ones that the young man and the young lady that I met in Madison, Wisconsin, and there was a third individual that I met in Cambridge. I didn't actually talk to the third individual. They all claimed to have come here from a nearby star, possibly Bernard's star or the next star out. And their description of that star in 1962 is consistent with what is known about those stars today. The next star out from Bernard's star, for example, is believed to have a system of at least 5 planets, is smaller than the sun, and is a reddish-brown dwarf. And in 1962, that is consistent with the description the young man gave me of the star where his home planet orbited. Yeah.
I know some extraterrestrials, but I've never known them to be stationed here. I haven't met the tall whites. I have brief memories of them.
Oh, yes?
I've met them. They're beautiful. They are beautiful. Anyway, why are they here on Earth? See, I don't know that. Why are they here? Or have they been here for thousands of years?
They use the base at Indian Springs up in Area 54 for the same purposes that the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy use bases in the Pacific. They use them as a place for their deep spacecraft to put in, to refuel, to refurbish, and stand out to space again. They're typically in port for 2 weeks. They typically land at sundown on the night of the full moon because they're trailing the Earth in its orbit. When at sundown, you're on the part of the Earth that's trailing in its orbit. And on the night of the moon is opposite the sun, and you're looking at a gravitationally smooth gravity field. See, and the moon is moving away from you. So for them, it's like an airplane coming in on an aircraft carrier landing, simple as pie. Then they stay in port for 2 weeks, and at midnight on the night of the new moon, then they take off. Now, at the night of the new moon, the moon is in between the Earth and the sun. And at midnight, you're on the side of the Earth, away from the sun, and if the moon is on the other side of the Earth on the night of the new moon, you're looking at a totally open field. There's nothing in front of you. And when the deep spacecraft powered up and took off, they powered up and took off. Now, I realized that if they were in trouble or if they had an experienced pilot, sometimes you'd see the smaller deep spacecraft come in 1 or 2 nights before the new moon or before the full moon, or 1 or 2 nights after the full moon. But the large ones, the ones that are the hardest to control, or the ones with the new pilots, always came in very promptly, just like at an airport. You could watch them land and take off. There were schedules to it. They had the smaller deep spacecraft were on a schedule of two months or 2.5 months. A specific craft could take off from the Earth, go somewhere, I'm certain, to another star, and return in 2 or 2.5 months. Now, if the nearest star is 4 light years away, that means that they were traveling, 24, 25 times the speed of light, which didn't seem at all. One time I mentioned that to them, and nobody flinched. Didn't seem at all like ho-hum to them. So, yeah, I saw a great deal that isn't in my books or that I haven't had a time to cover in this lecture. Sure.
Do you have a clue on the nature of the fuel?
It's my understanding that there are 5 subatomic particles that are easy to produce. I'm not sure which 5, but like mesons or whatever, that put out anti-gravity. And what they're doing is creating the particle. They're building the subatomic particle equivalent of an electromagnet. In an electromagnet, you have electrons following wires. Well, what they're doing is creating particles that put out anti-gravity and using the coils to strengthen the field, just like an electromagnet does. I'm not sure which 5, but I've always felt that if our scientists at Livermore would stop telling me about how much they know and instead start running a few experiments by chunking those mesons down and the other subatomic particles around fiber optic coils, you see, building fiber optics that bend those particles and chunk them down there, that it would be a very simple matter to discover. Yeah. The guy in the back? Okay. The guy in red, and then I'll come over here on this side.
What is their concept of God?
I don't know, but as you see in my books, in the second book, when the teacher was explaining to the other tall whites that day I was up in the main hangar, and they had me standing up in front of them with chairs, although they were folding chairs, and the American general off on the left, and she was saying, and also in book 1, in the day they had me out at the Range 3 lounge, the teacher was saying to the crowd, to the tall whites, about me, she was saying he believes in God, and he believes that his God will protect him from us when we come in close. And everyone understood. And so she didn't have to explain to them religious concepts or what God was. They all understood what she meant by that. And so that's as close as they ever came to explaining anything relating to religion to me. Over here on this chat, yes, the guy in blue. What kind of reason does our government have for them? Agreement? Well, from what I understand, the agreement is that the government will provide them with a base because the outer perimeter is manned by by human guards, U.S. Air Force guards. The inner perimeter is treated like an alien embassy and is manned by the aliens. It's physically running around about 1/3 of the way up on that mountain. When you go up that Indian Springs Valley, and you get to the very end, it's so beautiful. It's a shame it's a government land because it would be one of the most beautiful resorts in America. I've always felt that, I mean, if you were to just blindfold somebody and take them up there and release them, they wouldn't think they were on the earth anymore because it's so beautiful. And I've been up there a number of times. When you get up to there to the right and you go to start going up along the road along the side of the mountain to where the human guard shack is, golly, it's just breathtakingly beautiful. And what the government wants is technology transfer. The government would do anything to get technology transfer from the tall whites. The tall whites only agree to things if it's in their interest. And so and in return, the tall whites get a base, you see, which they need for to service their deep spacecraft. The tall whites didn't come here to actually give us technology. It has to be in their interest. So the tall whites had no reason to tell us how to build deep spacecraft. The day that I was out there, for example, in book 2 that I previously described, there was only tall whites working on that craft. It had been built using parts provided to them by the U.S. Air Force. However, the Air Force gave them the parts and they assembled it, especially the propulsion system, with no humans around. That's why I say, as far as I know, I'm the only human that ever got closer than any other human to this craft, while the alien mechanics were actually working on it. The tall whites didn't see any reason didn't see where it would be in their benefit to help them, for them to help us in that area. Other areas, however, like radios, they were all perfectly willing to help us with areas like radios, like all sorts of things, where they're, so like they could put in and say, I'd like to buy a new replacement radio for my Scoutcraft, and have the Americans provide them with a new high-quality radio, you see, and where the Americans and the aliens had mutual agreements. One night, on several nights early on, when I was in my barracks and the American generals came through with the alien generals, I could hear them standing right outside the door, way closer than from here to that door, because it was a very small thing, maybe as close as from here to that first line of chairs, and they were talking with the aliens about projects that they could do jointly. the American generals wanted to pick a couple of Air Force officers, for which they were offering me as one of them. They could say, well, we could send him to college and make him an officer. I was an enlisted man at the time. And they wanted to put 2 of them on the deep spacecraft and send them down to the next stop and see what was down there and then come back and tell them. The alien generals didn't feel that that was in there, they thought that was a waste of time, okay? What they wanted was for the American officers and the alien generals to pick a planet, an Earth-like planet. They said there were several nearby, or around stars that were nearby, and for their version of nearby could be 10 light years, which were too cold for them to colonize, but from their point of view would be just perfect for humans that weren't otherwise inhabited. But they described them as being similar to, say, Illinois or Wisconsin. The aliens liked it way warmer than we do. And their version was that they would handle the transport, the ships, and that would be in their hands. But once we got there, we'd be in charge of everything on the planet. And all they wanted was for us to build them a base that they could use on their planet, just like they have one here on Earth, and we could do anything we wanted with the rest of the planet. And then they felt that in the course of building that, what they were offering was that whenever our guys needed supplies, they would take them with them to the store, wherever it happened to be, you see. So if our guys needed more supplies, they could either bring them back here to the Earth to get the supplies, or to whatever planet was closest where you could get the appropriate building supplies. And they felt that in that process, humans would learn about their society and they would learn about ours. They thought that was a better deal than merely putting a couple guys on a spacecraft and telling them to go look at the store. And it showed how the aliens thought, namely that they would agree to anything provided they saw where they would benefit from it. Okay. Let's see. I'll take that one. Yeah.
Charles, I think under any set of other circumstances, this kind of material would be classified in top secret number or something like that. You know, in effect, you're being permitted to release this by virtue of no action against you. Seems like it's part of an acclimation program or part of it. Do you agree, or do you have any reasons why you think you were allowed to do this without any?
The committee that picked me had aliens on it and human generals on it, Air Force generals. And when you make an agreement with the aliens, you keep it, okay? The consequences of breaking an agreement with the aliens are enormous. When I say they live like 700 years, remember, even though it's been 40 years for us, that's peanuts for them. They live 700 years. If the American generals when they made an agreement with the generals, it wasn't for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It was an agreement, period. And if they thought that the U.S. Air Force was breaking its agreements by, say, pressuring Charlie, the consequences would be enormous. And it has nothing to do with whether I'm a nice guy or not a nice guy, or whether they like me or didn't like me. It's when you make an agreement with the aliens, can you be trusted? And they didn't have to be long-suffering. Remember, as I describe in my books, each one of them carried those weapons up their sleeve. And if you like the teacher, if an American general were to come up to the teacher, she doesn't have to ask him questions. They wear that electronic communication equipment. They can tell what you're thinking. And if all she's got to do is go see if he did anything that broke the agreement. And if she finds anything in there, she can jerk the equalizer and have him on his knees. I knew a CIA guard once that was terrified of the teacher. He told me that he had been escorting her down the steps of the Capitol building one Sunday afternoon, and that she had been talking with U.S. senators, and she was disguised as a human. And he said because he wasn't familiar with the way they walked, as she was coming down the steps, she was wearing low heels, not high heels, but just, flats, that he thought she was going to trip and fall, because he wasn't used to the fact that how they walked up and down steps. He said without thinking, he reached out and grabbed her by the elbow to steady her, the way you would, say, a lady. And he said she damn near, pardon my language, she almost killed him. She jerked that thing, and before he knew it, she had him down on his knees, giving him the equivalent of 120,000 volts AC, saying, do you think we're fools? Do you think I'd come down these steps if I couldn't take care of myself? And by the time she finished with him, it was nothing but yes ma'am, no ma'am. So when I say that when you make an agreement with the aliens, you keep it, and the generals will do anything for technology transfer, well, here I am. Remember when I came off the ranges in conclusion, I didn't bring anything with me. I didn't bring any pictures. I didn't bring any diaries. I didn't bring any blueprints. I was never part of anything. I was never shown anything classified. I was never given a briefing. I came off with just my memories, okay? And remember, the aliens, in conclusion, are not in favor of secrecy. It's only the generals that were in favor of secrecy. It was very common for the aliens to remark, the teacher and those people, to remark about how silly the secrecy was. They felt that if they dressed up to look like humans and behaved themselves, they ought to be able to go into Las Vegas and shop for pretty dresses just like anybody else. Okay? Yeah? That lady? Mm-hmm. The CIA, the regular dealers didn't know that. They just knew that the government was coming and they had to stand aside. The CIA guards that were there and the dealers that were there, they weren't told much. They were just told that if these people come in, you know, be nice to them, okay? One dealer I was talking to, one of the CIA guards that I was talking to when he was dealing, and he was looking down like he didn't want anyone to know that he was talking to me because he wasn't forbidden to talk to me. It's just that, you know, the CIA guys are always trying to pretend there's somebody else, you know. And nothing stands out in the crowd faster than a general and a CIA guard trying to look like an ordinary human. You know, they don't know how to do it. You know, none of them have the faintest idea. You know. And he was saying a group of your people, speaking to me, he was saying a group of your people came through last Saturday night. And I said, my people, you know? And he said, yeah, you know, the white people. And I said, well, where did they come from? And he said, none of us know anything. You're the only one that knows anything, okay? All he knew was that he knew me, they all knew me by face, name, rank, serial number. They knew that when some people came in, if they issued the normal words, like I was the friend of the teacher or teacher's pet, then you're nice to them. But they weren't told any more than they had to be. Yeah. Yes. And you'll see in book 3 those 3 ladies that, you know, handed me the book, where the head lady handed me the book in my barracks. And the same 3 ladies that had been wanting to play pool with, you know, Bridges in book 2, and he couldn't take it. That was their point, was to go into the into the Senate. Remember, the Senate has that pool room in the basement where the senators take bribes. I know they call it something else. They say, let's bet on this pool game, and then guess what? The senator wins, so you hand him money, right? You know, and say, oh, it was just a pool game, right? You know, so, you know, well, that's where they were headed for, you see, to talk to the senators over the pool table. You know, from their point of view, they loved the game of pool. It's how you drive a gravity-powered spacecraft, is by playing pool with the stars. And, you know, that's a wonderful place to go talk to senators. I don't want to run too long, so I'll take these questions here, and then I'll call it a day. I'll take each one of you that has your hands, and then I'll call it a day, okay? Let's see, I'll start with the lady in the back, okay? Oh. I can only guess, but you'll notice that in my books I clearly described their technology where they could read my mind and tell what I was thinking and place thoughts in it, as long as they were simple thoughts. And I see the CIA has been working on that ever since 1954. So that's as much as I know. The lady in the back, and. Do I think it may be possible that there may be more than one version of human? I saw no evidence that they travel in time, okay? Now, my feeling is that because meteors blast DNA material all over this solar system and the ones next to it, and vice versa, my feeling is that if you go out and look at life on nearby planets, that it'll look like us. One night when I asked the teacher, as I described in book 3, what life on other planets looked like, or how humans compared, she said that the humans were unique in our ability to play with animals. She said that on the other planets where they had seen intelligent life, they were all plant eaters. She said she was a plant eater. We're the only ones that go out and play with animals, that keep pets. She said that that was really unique. You know, like her example was that I grew up on a farm in Wisconsin. I know how to milk cows, ride horses, play with dogs. All those animals could kill me, but I feel comfortable around them because I first decide how is that animal thinking. And she's pointed out how unique that was, since humans are more intelligent than those animals. And most intelligent creatures don't want to do that. They don't want to pretend or decide how a less intelligent animal is thinking. So she said on most planets, the intelligent creatures began by killing off all the animals because they were plant eaters. Who needs them, right? And she thought that was really unusual, that I was willing to just go make friends with anybody's dog and play with them and teach them to roll over and feed them and pat them on the head, you know. And the implication was that those other intelligent forms of life didn't differ too much from either us humans or her as a tall white. Yeah, the guy in the back? Yeah.
What about theologically, the fall and sin, okay, because sin entered into our world, and this is probably like more of a Lucian question, but would you say that they have moral depravity like humans do?
They understood tit for tat. The teacher's example was that if they didn't hurt me, why would I want to hurt them? If they didn't stand in my way, then why would I be afraid of them? They understood that if I was nice to them, they would be nice to me, and vice versa. You see in Book 1 in the chapter entitled, Is It for Nothing? The day I went out in the sagebrush at Range 1 and rescued the teacher's daughter who was lost in the sagebrush, and then when I saw that she wasn't human, became hysterical and vomited my guts out in the sagebrush and so on, and you know, got back to the Range 1 weather shack and locked the door and just tried to get back to normal and couldn't. You see, from their point of view, thank heaven Charlie was here, they needed to reward me. They understood, I did something nice for you, they'll do something nice back. That was as much religion as that was as close to religion as we were able to talk about. And other than that, I'd have to speculate. Okay. How about you? Okay.
Have you seen anything that will interpret as art? That they have artists that they create
Oh yeah.
music, painting?
Oh yeah. They loved. You see in Book 1 my paint by number set. I was so proud. I know Van Gogh is turning over in his grave for me to call that art. They took that from me, and it was gone for months. Before they took that to another planet and showed it to somebody before they brought it back to me. They thought that was fine art. You know, you see that's in Book 1. When you look in their Scoutcraft hangar, that's in the Arroyo, northwest of Range 4. The day I was in there, and I yellowed out before opening the door to the inner hangar. On the walls, they had their writing, which looks like Egyptian hieroglyphs, if a guy didn't know better, and it's pink against white, okay? And I'm not sure how much of it was actually writing and how much might have just been artistic design. One night the teacher showed me her little girl. Her little girl was wearing the normal suit, but the teacher had sewn a frill or a ruffle around the middle, the way a human mother would for her little girl. And the teacher was very proud of it, you know. The teacher used to make fun of the American generals because she used to say, well, they're all old men, and the generals, for the commissary up on the mountain, would just go out and get like the Sears catalog or the Montgomery Ward's catalog, and then they would just pick all the medical clothing, you know, the white clothing that nurses and doctors would wear, and that's all that was in the commissary, you know. And she used to make fun of the American generals for being old men without any fashion sense, you know. One of the discussions I used to have with them, as I describe in my books, was, you know, how much does a pretty dress cost in Las Vegas? And I decided that if they went into the Sands and they won $100 playing blackjack, which was peanuts for them because their eyes are better than ours and all the cards look different, then they could go across the street to a shopping center that was open till midnight and have a nice selection of dresses that she and the other women could buy. And I'm certain they did that. One of my friends, his wife worked in that shopping center, and she used to tell the funniest true story about how at 11 o'clock at night this group of ladies came in, and one stood in front of her and wouldn't let her do anything, while the other two went off and looked at dresses. And in her own words, she said it looked like they'd never seen a dress before. You know, it was the first time they'd gone shopping, you know. And so, yeah, they like art and music just like we do. I'll take the lady with the long hair, okay?
Yeah, I have to go back to Madison, Wisconsin. I
Mhm.
years. I just moved back to San Diego
Mhm.
there. And my experience was very, very strange as far as state government
Mhm.
seemed to defer a lot to University of Wisconsin. And we know that it's now the leading biotechnical research center in the country.
Mhm.
And I have a feeling that there's a lot more involvement with outside
Mhm.
participants. And I think Madison has a large number now. Is that
Mhm.
your feeling too?
Yes, yes. The man in the blue shirt, yeah?
I was just curious if they believe, if they think about what happens after they die, if they believe in reincarnation or.
I don't know, but they clearly love their parents and their children. And, you know, that is one of the, like when my father died, I'm Roman Catholic, it was very comforting to me to be able to go and pray, knowing that his soul was still alive and in heaven somewhere, you see. I presume they're the same way, but I can only guess. And the question in the back?
Yes, do you have any ongoing relationships with any of the whites today?
No, but that's their choice. See, if I were out like in the desert, or if I were out like in Mount Charleston, or Frump Valley, because those were all places I saw them up in Wheeler Pass. So they came, after they've come across 50, 100 light years of space, they're not going to be confined to 36 acres of rock out in the mountains. They're going to go wherever they want. And if I were to come across one, I would still be living by the same agreement. Namely, if I saw one, I would just stop where I was and stand quietly with my arms at my side and let them come as close as they wanted or leave. I wouldn't pursue. And if they came too close, then I would back away and expect them to not pursue, to just stay where they were. But I would still live by that same agreement.
But they protect you right now, right? I mean, they protect you right now, that's why you can talk. They know what you're doing all the time. Like being monitored, being recorded.
I don't feel monitored or protected.
Right.
Yeah, but once they made that agreement with the U.S. Air Force.
So that, but they know that nothing's happening, or how else would they know?
Well, in order for me to say anything, I'd have to speculate, but I don't feel monitored or I don't feel protected. I just feel like a guy, I can just go my way and do my thing, yeah. But then, how would I know, right? If you're good enough at it. I mean, I'm very religious. I have my 2 guardian angels, like everyone, and I pray to God, and as long as He sees fit to protect me, I am, and if He doesn't, I won't, Other than that, all I can say is I just have to be the person God made, I am what I am, and that's all that I am, yeah. Any more questions? I know I'm way over on my time, and, okay. Was that a question back there?
Yeah, several months ago in Refi Journal,
Mm-hmm.
a story, and you might be aware of it, of a woman who was blind at a university had a general show up,
Mhm.
a woman,
Mm-hmm.
who
Mm-hmm.
kind of the description is the same,
Mhm.
pretty much as the Paul White that you're saying.
Mhm.
They actually had this woman living with a blind woman
Mm-hmm.
at the university for a while. I don't know if this is.
The tall whites were, as I described in book 1, the tall whites were using their electronic equipment, were perfectly capable of putting images in your mind if you were relaxed and calm. Once you panicked, then all bets were off. And that story, I didn't see any reason to doubt that story. The tall whites themselves, when you went on board their scout craft, for example, there weren't any screens. There weren't any television screens. There weren't any computer screens. Their eyes are like those of a cat. And so I don't think, when we look at a television set, we see the moving pictures. I don't believe that they see the moving picture because their vision is so good, you see. I believe that instead their communication equipment just puts the image directly in their mind and does it mind to mind. If they showed up without their communication equipment, and if none of their people had learned to speak English, which sometimes happened, especially in a number of episodes that I haven't published in my books, you were simply down to hand signals, And because I'm late on time, I won't go into some of those. But as you see, I have my desk, my table, and my books, and I'm always happy to answer questions and talk afterwards. But if they didn't have their equipment, they weren't telepathic. If they didn't speak English and they didn't show up with their equipment, you were physically down to pointing and gestures. Any other questions? Oh,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
So
I'm,
just one thing real quick. Was your last
Sure.
communication when you left the military?
my last direct communication with them was.
And
However,
68?
in the Nellis incident of 1968, September 1968, I got out of the service in May of 68. And in the Nellis incident, remember, the Tall Whites sat down with the scout craft a half mile from the Range 3 weather shack. And you see the guy after me got attacked, and then they wouldn't send anybody